You know that feeling when someone who's been lecturing you for years about being honest suddenly gets caught lying? Well, that's exactly what just happened to one of Congress's most sanctimonious members, Maxine Waters, the woman who's made a career out of screaming corruption at everyone else. She just got slammed by federal investigators for doing exactly what she accuses others of doing. We're talking systematic campaign violations, family payouts, and $68,000 in fines. But what will basically burn your bagels is how she's handling getting caught red-handed. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Look, if you like our videos and you haven't already, why don't you become a subscriber to the channel? You can hit that notification bell and smack the like button, and it'll help us get our message out to more people. Plus, you'll never miss a new video when it comes out. All right, so now I want to start today with a simple question. What do you call someone who spends 30 years pointing fingers at others for corruption only to get caught doing the exact same thing themselves? If you answered Maxine Waters, congratulations, you've been paying attention. And for Maxine, this isn't her first rodeo of being accused for corruption. It's kind of a part of her career. Last week, the Federal Election Commission dropped a bombshell that somehow managed to fly completely under the radar of our mainstream media friends. Funny how that works, isn't it? Well, here's what happened. The FEC, that's the Federal Election Commission, for those who are keeping track at home, just finished investigating Maxine Waters' 2020 campaign operation. And what they found would make even the most cynical political observer do a double take. Now, before the libnuts start going around and blaming Trump for this, calling it a witch hunt, remember, I said that it was in 2020 that it started, which means that the investigation went through the Biden administration years, because he started in 2021 and they just gave their conclusion. So we're talking about Maxine Waters, the same Maxine Waters who spent the better part of 3 decades in Congress making a living out of calling other people corrupt. She's the woman who can't get through a television interview without screaming about ethics, transparency, and accountability. She's basically turned finger pointing into a true art form. So when the FEC comes knocking on her door with questions about her campaign finances, you'd think someone with her track record would have everything buttoned up perfectly, right? Well, you'd be dead wrong. Dead wrong. Here's what the investigation found, and trust me, this is where it gets good. Waters' 2020 campaign, officially called Citizens for Waters, because apparently even campaign names need to sound virtuous these days. Well, it didn't just violate federal election law, guys. They systematically abused it. That's what they wrote over and over again. The FEC's own words. Her campaign repeatedly violated federal law, not once, not twice, repeatedly. Now, when federal investigators use the word repeatedly, that's not an accident. It's not a typo. That's bureaucratic speak for this was a pattern of behavior, not a mistake. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't an accounting error. It was blatant systematic corruption. And the consequences? A cool $68,000 in fines. And check this out. Her campaign treasurer now has to go to a mandatory commission-sponsored training program for political committees like a misbehaving intern. And here's where the family business angle comes in. During this same period, Waters paid her daughter a cool $192,000 for what they're calling campaign services. Now, I'm not saying paying family members for legitimate work is automatically corrupt. But when you're already under investigation for repeatedly violating federal law, these things tend to raise eyebrows. Now, how come they're not talking about criminal charges? Maxine Waters violated federal law. There's not going to be any charges. They just fined her $68,000. Why no criminal charges? They went after Trump for something he didn't even do, right? Supposedly federal election charges. So this is especially true when those payments went through something called a slate mailer operation, which, if you're not familiar with the political jargon, is basically a way to bundle candidate endorsements and information into voter guides. The question is, what exactly did Waters' daughter do to earn nearly $200,000? And why did the FEC find this arrangement questionable enough to include in their investigation? When Waters' people got caught, their response was predictable. They called it all a series of innocent errors. Oops, we accidentally violated federal law repeatedly, over and over. Oops, we accidentally paid a family member 6 figures. Oops, we accidentally had to settle with federal investigators. It was just innocent errors. But here's the thing about errors. They tend to happen once, maybe twice if you're really unlucky. When federal investigators say you repeatedly violated the law, that's not an error. That's called a pattern. And patterns tell us everything we need to know about someone's character. Speaking of patterns, this isn't exactly Waters' first dance with ethics violation. A liberal watchdog group, and I want to emphasize liberal here, called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, named Maxine Waters one of Congress's most corrupt members. Not once, not twice, but in 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011. 4 separate years, 4 different investigations, 4 times that even liberal organizations couldn't ignore what she was doing. But here's where the story gets really rich. Because instead of taking responsibility, instead of showing some humility after getting caught, Waters is back on television doing what she does best, playing the victim and pointing fingers at everyone else. Now, here's a little clip that shows Maxine right before the election. She went on TV and said this about the American people when unwittingly admitting that Trump was going to win. And I want you to listen carefully because this tells you everything you need to know about her mindset. Give it a watch.
America voted for him.
Racism. People don't like to talk about racism, but the fact of the matter is the majority of his votes are going to come from whites. It's not about the economy.
So it's going to come from whites, and that automatically means racism. That's what she just said, guys.
And all that, people would like to basically hide behind. It's about white versus others.
But, it's looking possible tonight that Donald Trump has won the popular vote. Are you saying that the majority of Americans are racist?
I'm saying the majority of the Americans will buy into anything as long as they believe that somehow they will have more advantage.
This is classic Maxine Waters from her playbook. I mean, what would she say when it was pointed out to her that Trump got more black and Latino voters than he did the first time around? When you know you're being looked at for doing something wrong, you immediately start talking about racism. That's what Democrats do. It's their playbook. When you can't admit that your candidate has been outplayed to the level where Trump outplayed both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, you cry racism. It's the lowest common denominator among scoundrels in politics. And here's the fascinating part. When someone did point out that Trump actually gained support among black and Latino voters, which is documented fact, not opinion, Waters' response was basically to stick her fingers in her ears and say that it's not true. She said, there may be some expansion in the Latino community, but all of this talk about getting black votes, I don't think is true. Well, translation, the data doesn't fit my narrative, so I'm going to ignore it. Seriously. This is the same woman, by the way, who back in March said Melania Trump should be deported. Think about that for a second. A sitting member of Congress suggesting that a former first lady should be kicked out of the country. As far as I can tell, even the worst of the libnuts have never manufactured any crimes against Melania. So what would she be deported for? She's an American citizen. And it's not just this time around. Let's not forget her greatest hits from Trump's first term, where she literally told her supporters to harass and go after cabinet members in public, knowing she was being filmed. Give it a watch.
We can't protect the children.
You remember this?
We can't protect anybody. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
Yeah, they're not welcome. You push back on them. Now, this is the same person who now lectures us about political civility and the importance of democratic norms. He talks about Trump and his people training with their guns up in the mountains to get ready for the election. Of course, she never mentioned which mountains because the whole thing is absurd. And here's what really gets under my skin. Where's the media coverage? Where are the breathless CNN panels dissecting every detail of Maxine's downfall with the FCC? Where are the MSNBC legal experts explaining the significance of systematic campaign finance violence? They're nowhere to be found because that doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't help their cause. So they just pretend that it didn't happen. They do this all the time. Imagine for just 1 second if this were a Republican. Ooh. Imagine if this were, say, Ron DeSantis or, say, Tim Scott, who got caught paying their family members 6 figures while systematically violating federal election law. Do you think that story would get buried on page 47 of the newspaper? No, not on your life. Of course not. There would be wall-to-wall coverage for weeks. They would say that that kind of systematic criminality was pervasive throughout the whole party. I mean, think about it. You know, they would throw everything at it, but Maxine would be calling for deporting every Republican in the House. But when it's Maxine, and that double standard tells you everything you need to know about how our media really operates. But here's the thing, guys. The facts don't care about media bias. The FEC doesn't care about political narratives. When you break federal election law repeatedly, there are consequences. And all the Democrats are like this. Don't forget that Judge Juan Merchan's court in New York City, he allowed radical progressive DA Alvin Bragg to convert 34 state documents charges for not crossing T's and dotting I's into federal election felonies. And when the Federal Election Commission executive wanted to testify that Trump broke no federal election laws, Judge Merchan refused to let him testify. This is how Democrats operate as a whole. Everything is rigged in their favor. And then when they get caught, it's deny, deny, deny. The $68,000 fine might not seem like a lot for someone who's been in Congress for 3 decades, but it represents something important. It represents accountability. It represents the idea that nobody, not even the loudest, most self-righteous members of Congress, is above the law. And here's the silver lining in all of this. The system worked, guys. Not perfectly, not completely, but it worked. The FEC investigated, they found violations, they imposed penalties. Now, that's progress. That's accountability. That's the kind of thing that gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, we can start cleaning up the mess in Washington. Because at the end of the day, this isn't really about Maxine Waters. She's just one corrupt politician among many. This is about whether we're going to hold our elected officials to the same standards that they like to hold to all of us. This is about whether someone can spend 30 years pointing fingers at others while breaking the rules themselves and to get away with it. The facts are out there, guys. The violations are now documented. The hypocrisy is exposed, and no amount of race baiting or finger pointing is going to change any of that. This is what real accountability looks like. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And sometimes a start is all you need to begin changing things for the better. The swamp creatures hate it when the system actually works. They hate it when there are real consequences for their actions. But that's exactly why stories like this matter. Because every time a corrupt politician gets caught, every time there are real penalties, every time the system works the way it's supposed to, it sends a message to every other politician in Washington. You're not untouchable. You're not above the law. And your time might be next. And that's a message worth sending. All right. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
I got